Good morning and welcome. Welcome indeed to another edition of the Mark Moses Show, as we're always broadcasting live from the Anidjar and Levine Accident Attorney Studios. Take back control of your life. Call them today, 1-800-747-FREE. That's 1-800-747-3733. That's Anidjar and Levine Accident Attorneys. Official sponsor of the studio here on the Mark Moses Show. Also want to give a shout out to Walk On Sports Bistreaux right there in Vieira and Chumley's Depot in downtown Melbourne. Great podcast partners of the show as well. Now, this guy always joins me every Thursday. He has the Ryan Sandberg shirt on right now. I feel bad we have to have this discussion. I know it's your favorite player of all time, maybe in all of sports, and he passed away earlier this week. It was very, very sad. I texted you right away. I feel awful. Tim, usually I say, how you doing today? But look, the floor is yours. Your thoughts on Ryan Sandberg.
No, hey, the past really week and a half has been really tough on us children of the 80s. You see, obviously, the first to go was Malcolm Jamal Warner, Theo from The Cosby Show, which we all loved as kids. Then Ozzy dies the very next day, Ozzy Osbourne. We talked about him a lot last week on the show. You and I weren't off the show 5 minutes last week when I got a tip about Hulk Hogan. And then I texted you and I said, Hulk Hogan might be dead. And then it was confirmed shortly thereafter. And then, Ryan Sandberg this past Monday dies. And this one hits me harder probably than all of them because, Mark, I grew up a huge Ryan Sandberg fan. I wrote a column about it this week. But, growing up in Florida, we moved to Florida when I was really young from New York. My dad, he was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan after they left New York to go out west. He hated the Yankees, didn't really think much of the Mets. He and I started watching Cubs games together because it was just so fun. You get home from school, there's a 2:20 game on. Harry Carey's going absolutely nuts. Steve Stone is making just hilarious but very dry comments. It was just such a great broadcast team. But I immediately Ryan Sandberg, I just gravitated toward him. He was such a smooth player in the field. He had such a sweet swing. He was, just kind of went about his business. Some of his contemporaries were a little bit more flashy, Ricky Henderson, Jose Canseco, guys that, really kind of made spectacles of themselves. Rhino just went to work, man. He just went about his business. Before I even started watching, he was MVP in '84, had the famous Ryan Sandberg game where he hit the 2 homers off Bruce Sutter. And then in '89, he, Andre Dawson, Sean Dunston, Mark Grace, Rafael Palmeiro, Greg Maddux. God, I can still see them all. Rick Sutcliffe, Mike Bielecki, Wild Thing, Mitch Williams. They go to the playoffs on this great run where they eventually lose to San Francisco. And who knows, Mark? Maybe if the Cubs beat the Giants, maybe they're in Chicago and not in California when the earthquake happens during the World Series. A lot of what ifs there. But then, Sandberg, a few years later, he retires right in June of '94, right in the middle of the season. He had gotten divorced from his first wife. His life was kind of falling apart. He was in a slump, stepped away from the game. That was right before my senior year in high school. And then I'm in college, 1996. I remember I was living in what's called the Graham area at the University of Florida. It had 3 buildings, Simpson, Graham, and I don't remember the third. But Graham had this little office where you'd get your mail, you'd check the mailboxes and stuff. And I remember walking in one evening to check my mailbox, and they had, one of these small fatback TVs mounted up in the top corner of the office. It always had ESPN on, and you see breaking news, Ryan Sandberg announces return. And I was like, oh my God, I can just still remember standing there and the smile and the goosebumps and everything. And I said, Mark, I was like, I never got to see him play. I haven't gotten to see him play. Well, I'm going to see him play now. And then the Cubs came to Miami to play at that time the Florida Marlins in 1996. So my dad, my mom, me, and my best friend Chris Makowitz, who lives here, great exterminator in Brevard County. Look him up, but Makowitz, a great guy. So the 4 of us, we went down to Miami, and on that first day, Sandberg homers. And the Cubs won 5-4 in extra innings. So that was a thrill. But before the game, Rhino's signing autographs. And I'm laying on the dugout. My friend Chris has me by the ankles as I'm reaching across trying to get an autograph. And Rhino, he was called back to the dugout when I was all of 3 people away from him, and I didn't get the autograph. I was so upset. My dad, nicely enough, got me an autographed Sandberg baseball for Christmas that year, but I
Oh,
would have
that's
loved to have
nice.
gotten it in person. But then the next day, he also hit a double. The Cubs won both games there, and that I saw in Miami. It was a 3-game series. And so, the memories there, of course. And then 2015, I go to Wilmington, Delaware, to the newspaper we own there, the Journal. And I was on a business trip up there, and the leadership team told us, yeah, we're all going to get on a bus tonight. We're going to go see the Phillies play. It was about an hour away. Sandberg was the manager at the time. So then I got to see him manage the Phillies. And then 9 days later, he resigned as manager of the Phillies. So I barely made it in that window, but I got to see him play. I got to see him manage. The shirt I'm wearing, Mark, the stats go through 1989. Yes, I got this shirt in 1990 when I was 13 years old. Still fits me, buddy, because I'll tell you what, I said my prayers, I ate my vitamins, and I worked out the way Hulk Hogan told me to. And I've been able to stay fit and thin and in shape and a little bit tight. But you know what? I was a medium back then. I'm a large now. But Mark, just Sandberg meant so much to me. When I heard he had died the other night, obviously it was a tough night sleeping. But, it also made me go a trip down memory lane. I wrote about it. I broke out my Ryan Sandberg rookie card. For those in Brevard County, there used to be this great baseball card shop in Rockledge off Barton called Bases Loaded. So I bet a lot of people hear that name and go, oh, man, I remember buying baseball cards at that place. Well, I had gotten my name on a wait list for this Ryan Sandberg rookie card because they didn't have one at the time. And they got one in, and I remember them calling me on during the week, or at least they called my house. I was 13 at the time. But it was a $25 baseball card, which think about that in 1990. That was pretty darn expensive considering a pack of cards cost all of a quarter. And so my grandmother goes to pick up this card. I gave her $25. She thought I was nuts, spending that much money on a baseball card. Well, she gets the Bases Loaded. And even though they had called me and told me they had the card in, the new Beckett had come out that day, the price guide for baseball cards, and the card had gone up from $25 to $33. So I remember my grandmother calling me and telling me that the card had gone up, and I was like, I don't have $8 more. I'm 13. It's not like I had a job. So I didn't think I was going to get the card. My grandmother came home and she gave me the card in this very hard case here. She paid the extra $8 for me. Grandma, I love you up in heaven. And so yeah, that's I could go on about different Ryan Sandberg memories and stuff, but just he had cancer, he had beaten it. Last year on my podcast, I interviewed Andre Dawson. Dawson was also a cancer survivor, and he had told me he had been speaking with Sandberg. He had he was encouraging him through his cancer diagnosis. If you remember in Sandberg's Hall of Fame speech in 2005, he stumped for Andre Dawson, said Andre should be in the Hall of Fame. Took almost a decade more for Andre to get in, but he got in. But Sandberg, just such a good guy, a grounded guy. And boy, the baseball world lost a titan.
All right, that was 7 straight minutes on Ryan Sandberg. That was fantastic. That really was. I'm going to start getting teary-eyed when you told the story about your grandma. I know that was hard for you to do. That's a great story. We were joking off air. We were at Tim Walters. There is no way you are ever selling that card. There is no way, Jose. No way. Unless they show up with $100 million. But I don't even that. Maybe then your grandma comes from heaven. Yeah, sell the card, Tim.
Yeah, she would smack me in the head. There would definitely be there would be some crossover from the other side, but I've got his Fleer card, I've got his Donruss rookie card, but it was this one. This one was what Topps was kind of the brand at the time. I used to have, and I posted a picture of this. I was able to find it in my old photo album. I had on my wall as a kid. I had a poster of Sandberg. I had 2 shelves. I had all of his baseball cards from each year in hard cases standing up on the shelf. And then on the next shelf, I had starting lineup figures, including Andre, Sandberg, Mark Grace. And I had other magazine cutouts of Sandberg. I called it my Rhine Shrine. And I luckily have a picture of that from my childhood. But that was it's a big part of my upbringing, my being. And Yeah, just going to miss the guy, 65, too young for him to be gone.
I'll tell you this. My dad is a true Southsider. That's where he grew up. He loves, and I'll use a term they don't use anymore, a pale hoe. That's right. The White Sox. He loves that team. So when I messaged him the other night, I was like, oh, man, Ryan Sandberg, even he was a little upset. Like, he understands when you think of all-time great baseball players and all-time great Chicago sports athletes, I think he's up there. I think he's kind of underrated when you think of, and you were kind of saying this a second ago, some of these other guys in baseball that were more outgoing, like a Ricky Henderson, or I think he's underrated. And those stats, it's funny. I love they're right on your shirt. In case you forget, they're right there so you can know them. I think he's underrated. And when I think of Ryan Sandberg, I think when I was a kid, I would play this game on Sega Genesis called MLB PA Baseball from 1993. And I think I brought up this game with you before. So this is how old in times I'm from. There were games that sometimes didn't have the approval of Major League Baseball, or the other way around, didn't have the Players Association approval. So in this game, MLB didn't endorse it from EA Sports. So you're like Chicago National versus Seattle. Texas takes on New York American. And that's sort of be. But man, I'd place the Cubs in that game. Oh man, you were talking about all those players. So Mark Grace, Glenn Allen Hill, who could destroy the baseball. Sammy Sosa was on that team, right? This is like 93. Oh man, Sean Dunston, Andre Dawson was on the team, right? Early 90s.
He was still on the team then. Yeah, him and Sosa played together, I think 1 year, maybe 2.
Yeah, and then you would be as Ryan Sandberg. I loved playing as that team in the video game. I would play that over and over and over again. But yeah, he's an all-timer. He is your favorite athlete of all time. Me personally, my favorite Cub growing up was Mark Grace because he had the same name as me. And he would make terrible, corny local commercials in Chicago, which I loved with all my heart. I did. I like Mark Grace. No batting gloves. Always remember that as well. He would.
Yeah, he was my dad's favorite player. So while I was rooting for for Sandberg, my dad was rooting for Grace. I actually have a binder of Mark Grace baseball cards, and I have a binder of Ryan Sandberg baseball cards. Just individual binders, not with any other players in them. Because obviously, I love Mark Grace. He was always hitting over 300. The lefty, big guy. He was obviously a favorite. Here's another kind of I'd call it a piece of trivia, but it can't be a piece of trivia because it happened, but it never happened, Mark. So the very first game that Wrigley Field ever had under the lights, Ryan Sandberg homered. He should be the first person to ever homer under the lights at Wrigley. But that game got rained out early, and the stats got wiped out. So Sandberg is not the first person to homer under the lights at Wrigley, but he should be. They should recognize him as such.
I remember that. Was that 89? I think so. Or it's late 80s. I remember this as a kid. Like that was a big deal. Oh man, they're going to play at night. Like that's crazy. What were you going to say?
Yeah, and I was going to say, you mentioned that Sandberg being underrated. If you look at Chicago sports, at the same time, you had 2 great number 23s playing in Chicago, Ryan Sandberg, Michael Jordan. I would put both of those on the Mount Rushmore of Chicago sports athletes. I would put Sandberg, I would put Jordan, I would put Walter Payton, and then the 4th spot would probably have to go to Ernie Banks, I imagine. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of other great athletes, but there could be an argument made that those are your top 4 Chicago area athletes in history, unless you can think, some people might argue for Frank Thomas. I would still take Sandberg and Banks over him, even though he was that great. I know you're a White Sox fan, so anyone else you could think of that deserves to be up there, Mark? Now he's pulling a prop out.
He didn't even play. My guy, Ken the Hawk Harrelson, voice of the White Sox, the only guy that would stand up to every other jabroni team, including the commissioner's office. My brother got this at a game. It is an official Ken Hawk Harrelson alarm clock. Okay, mine. This is the greatest giveaway ever. I'm sorry. It's a real. Now mine broke after a while. Okay, it is a real alarm clock. Okay. And what happens is like you hit it and it would say his all is like, put it on the board. He gone. Like all that stuff. And in case you don't know them, all right, hold on. Okay, I got to make sure I do this right. The back of it says all of the same. Pick to click, all that. Like all is from the Hawk, baby. If you ever get bored, just look up Best of Hawk Harrelson, where the White Sox lose and he's losing his mind. And this, you know what? This goes to a bigger discussion. We need crazy baseball broadcasters back. We have to teach the next generation to be insane. We need this because there's no Harry Carey. There's none of that anymore. Every guy sounds the same. We can't have this, Tim. We can't. Sorry.
No, there were a lot of great things Harry did. Obviously, he would point out beautiful women and say things broadcasters would never get away with anymore. He always seemed half in the bag. He'd try and spell names backward. And to me, that was the funniest thing. There was this catcher, and his name was Hector Villanueva. And one time Harry was trying to fill time, and he says, Villanueva spelled backwards. And it was the funny thing. And then Steve Stone, rather than chiming in or trying to help him, he just let the crowd silence sit there like a fat fish in your lap. It was great. That was just like, and that's what made their chemistry so great. So yeah, we could also talk about, they've had so many great broadcasters, Hawk and Harry Carey. They'd definitely be on the Broadcaster Hall of Fame. There's statues up around town for Harry Carey. And oh my goodness, I took a picture.
Jack Brickhouse. So Jack Brickhouse was on the radio. He has the statue. And the other one, okay, I'm sorry. The other one and he passed away as well, which is very sad. The other one was Cubs radio, Ron Santo, who was on the 69 Cubs. Oh, man. By the end there, it was like you were listening to WWE Monday Night Raw with him because he really was so pro Homer Cubs. It was the best.
Yeah, and Sandberg, again, as I mentioned in his Hall of Fame speech, he stumped for Dawson. The other person he stumped for, he said, Ron Santo now gets another vote now that I'm on the Veterans Committee. So Sandberg always advocating for, great Chicago Cubs who weren't getting their due, and Andre Dawson and Ron Santo at the time, those were definitely two of them.
Okay, you bring up a good point. I think everyone who gets inducted into a Hall of Fame, no matter the sport, during your speech, you should vouch for another player. I think that should be mandatory. You should pick and really take, and I know it's about you in that moment and you're thanking everyone, but I think that'd be a cool gesture moving. You pass it forward or pay it forward. You give it to the next guy. So that's awesome. Rhino did that. And by the way, Rhino is not spelled the way you think it is. That's another thing when people are writing about Ryan Sandberg. It's not. Real quick. Here is my runner-up for greatest giveaway at a baseball game. The Mr. Potato Head Tampa Bay Rays giveaway. It is a real Mr. Potato Head doll. That's right. I have this. So these are the two greatest baseball giveaways I have ever received. I have them in my office. I love. So take that, Ryan Sandberg, Cubs stuff. Yeah, that's right. Go Rays.
I'll tell you my favorite, Mark, and they'd never do this nowadays. What? 1991, the first non-spring training professional Major League Baseball game I ever saw. Obviously before the Marlins existed, before the Rays. So my dad drove us from Merritt Island up to Atlanta to old Fulton County Stadium, 1991. They gave away an actual wooden baseball bat. So I have a real baseball bat with the Jolly Rancher logo on it. So I could waffle somebody upside the head and you could read Jolly Rancher on the side of it. Imagine if they gave away like 10,000 bats nowadays. People would be beating each other to death in the aisles.
Yeah, that would be bad. It's just like the disco demolition night from the 70s where they had to cancel the game because the fans were going to burn down the stadium. Wooden bat day, and it's also dollar beer day. I hope this goes all right. I have done my buddy Jason and I, we went to a doubleheader, and it was dollar hot dog day. Oh, man. Oh, that was not good. There was a rain delay as well in there. It was Baltimore and Chicago. Oh, man. We were at the ballpark for about 9 hours. It was fun. My colon didn't approve of it after a while, but a dollar hot dog day. Amazing. Amazing.
That was
Dude.
also free defibrillator charge day.
That's what it was. Thank you for saying those nice things about Ryan Sandberg. And you and me discussed there was rumblings that he wasn't doing well. And we talked about. So look, it's not good. Cancer's no one's friend. It really isn't. It's very sad. I want your thoughts. You brought this up. We talked last week for 40 minutes on Ozzy Osbourne. And as you said, 5 minutes later, Hulk Hogan passes away. What are your thoughts, buddy, on Hogan?
I mean, it's hard. Again, everybody's hero in the 1980s, Mark. I think most people who weren't wrestling fans were first exposed to him in Rocky III, 1982, Mr. T, Clubber Lang, Eye of the Tiger. Well, early in that movie, they introduced Thunderlips, the ultimate male, and they bill him at almost 7 feet tall and 390 pounds in the movie. I later learned through the magic of Facebook that they actually had Hogan stand on a wooden box to make him even taller looking than Stallone. Yeah, his 6'7", 310-pound frame wasn't enough. They had to make him even more gigantic. But then, I remember as a 7-year-old, I was an Iron Sheik fan. I loved the boots. I loved the gimmick. And then Hogan comes in. It was supposed to be Bob Backlund, I believe, if I remember correctly, but Hogan had to substitute for him. Hogan comes in, breaks out of the camel clutch, which was supposed to be the unbreakable hold, pins the Iron Sheik 1, 2, 3 to win the belt. And Hulkamania was born then. He didn't even have theme music back then, and then all of a sudden he used to come out. The Rick Derringer song wasn't his first theme song. He had this Hulk Hogan song before that, but then the I Am a Real American took it to the next level. I remember WrestleMania 2 was the first pay-per-view my parents ever bought. I remember the attack by King Kong Bundy and Big John Studd, and they broke Hogan's ribs, and it set up WrestleMania 2 inside that crazy giant blue steel cage. And we bought the pay-per-view for that, and Hogan slammed Bundy and got out of the cage first. It was so awesome. And then they kept the momentum going. WrestleMania 3, they turned the lovable giant, Andre the Giant, into a heel, and he steals the belt on Saturday Night Main Event because of a double referee. Dave Hebner's supposed to be out there, and he cheats, and it turns out it's his twin brother, Earl. There were 2 Hebners. Who knew? And Andre becomes the champion. You go into WrestleMania 3, and Hogan is facing the 7'4", 520-pound giant. And as Hogan said, he picked him up over the head, and he slammed the giant down, and he pinned him 1, 2, 3. It was the greatest thing, Mark. For a kid all at 10, 11 years old, I tell you what, that guy, you can still hear it in me. I remember being just such a fan of his. And then, the Ultimate Warrior comes along, steals some of that thunder. Hogan rarely dropped the belt cleanly to somebody. WrestleMania 6, he drops the belt to Warrior, ultimately wins it back the following year. And then a few years later, leaves for WCW, and he kind of becomes obscure there. They didn't have the star power. His yellow and gold shtick had kind of worn thin. And then the Outsiders invade WCW, and you get Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and they keep alluding to this third person. And then one night at Bash at the Beach, it looks like Hulk Hogan's coming out to take them down, and the crowd's going crazy. And then he reveals he's that third person. So the biggest hero in history becomes the biggest heel in history. And they have a great run as the New World Order. And then, he in later years comes back and has that WrestleMania 18 classic with The Rock. What a great match that was. And then, a lot of the wrestlers who idolized Hulk Hogan as a kid, they just wanted to be in the ring and flex with him. I remember John Cena stopping him once, and, they did their flex off. Shawn Michaels got to do it. Those guys were as thrilled as kids to be in that ring with Hulk Hogan. And look, I know people are saying, oh, well, he said some things in later years that got leaked. They were private conversations. Never condone that. It was a horrible look. He apologized for a decade about it. And you know what? Just for all of those kids in the 80s and 90s that loved Hulk Hogan, he was a positive force. He taught us to do good, taught us to, say our prayers and take our vitamins, brother, and work out. And, so you can't take that away from the guy. And so I will always remember him. And Mark, I got one more prop here.
It's prop day here on the show with Tim Walters.
In 1985, I was in third grade, and after Hogan won that title against the Iron Sheik, they had a book fair at my school. I went to Divine Mercy Catholic School on Merritt Island, and I bought this book, Hulk Hogan Wins the Belt.
I remember this book.
Oh, this is great, man. You got Hulk Hogan in there. You got the Iron Sheik in there. It tells little stories about each guy. Nikolai Volkov, the evil Russian. You've got Roddy Piper's in there. Oh, boy, Andre the Giant. This is Mark. I mean, look at this. I'm wearing a shirt from 1990. Yeah. I got a book from 1985 and a baseball card from 1983. If you missed the decade of the 80s, unlucky for you.
That's awesome. Thank you for show and tell today. I love that, dude. I kind of feel like after almost a week now, or it was a week, I'm sorry, about the passing of Hulk Hogan, people talk about him like he's a fictional character. That's what they grew up with. They love him like he's Rambo, or he's Rocky, or he's Batman, he's Superman. Not the Terry guy. They love the character. That's what they love, and they'll defend that character, not the actual person. The actor playing Hulk Hogan, the real person was complicated, and there's all these like negative things were going on, and there's those like, you know, they wanted to have a union led by Jesse Ventura, and Hulk was the one that kind of stopped it. And then, like you said, he never should have talked to Bubba the Love Sponge. Who are we kidding here? Never should have been friends with him. That screwed him over. You had the races on the tape, and there's all these negative stories, but it feels like now everyone just talks about that, the height of the 80s and then the NWO. We're going to bury this, kind of like, you know what it reminds me of? It's kind of like Michael Jackson now, where years have gone by and people are just saying, oh my God, you have the TV guy. What else do you have the Ark of the Covenant from Raiders of the Lost Ark? What are you going to bring out for us?
I got top men working on it. I have all four in this series. They have, let's see, Goldberg was on one. I could grab those too, dude, but we'll stick with Hulk Hogan.
I have been saying this nonstop. I'll say it to you. The top three moments in the history of wrestling in my lifetime: the Montreal Screwjob with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. And then I go Hogan turning to the NWO, creating it, turning heel. You never saw that before. You didn't know, because before it was good guy, bad guy, like an old Western. White hat is good guy, black hat is bad guy. Then it blurred the line where the bad guy can be the anti-hero and people could cheer for him. Never saw that before. And it's very 90s Jerry Springer, but that's what happened. And what you said, him doing the body slam on Andre the Giant. So this guy was in two of the top three moments in my eyes. When you look at some other guys, what's CM Punk's greatest moments? And I like CM Punk, but can you name them? No. John Cena's, what are his? You know what I mean? Like, this guy is the GOAT. He's the Mount Rushmore. He's on top, and I'm sorry he passed away. And honestly, I'm amazed his body lasted this long to get to 71. What are your thoughts, Tim?
Yeah, and, he also, the people he helped make, people say that Hulk, and he wouldn't drop the belt to just anybody. Well, he should have had that right as who he was, who got to be stars and who didn't. He helped The Undertaker. If you remember, The Undertaker's debut was at Survivor Series, and he shows up, and, nobody knew who Mean Mark Callis was from the NWA. He shows up as The Undertaker, and he put on this show. And, Hogan was always the one that wasn't selling. Well, The Undertaker wasn't selling. He did that Michael Myers sit-up, and Hogan looked genuinely scared and took off running. And then eventually The Undertaker wins the belt from Hogan because he got knocked in the noggin with the urn. And, so that so many, just so many guys that he helped. People talk about how he held certain people down. Well, he held certain people down if he didn't think they were main eventers. And even Bret Hart kind of felt Hogan held him down. But Hogan also helped out the Warrior. He helped out The Undertaker. He helped out guys that he looked at and said, these are the people that should be belt holders. So, if people hold it against him for that, I'm sorry. What can you do? Bret Hart, yeah, he was an amazing technical wrestler, and I was actually a big Bret Hart fan. But back then, it was the era of the big guys. As I mentioned, Andre, Big John Studd, Hulk Hogan, The Undertaker. And Bret Hart was all of 215, 220 pounds at the most. He wasn't the biggest guy. So it's like back then, you didn't look at, the best technical wrestler should be the champion. No, Yokozuna should. He's 600 pounds and he'd sit on you, So, that's kind of how things went back then. So I'm never going to hold it against Hulk Hogan for trying to do what's best for business, because we all, in the end, if you've got a certain job, you do what's best for business. But one other story, Mark, I can't remember where I heard this. It was a reporter who was talking about Hulk Hogan. And they were interviewing him, and somebody came and knocked on the door, and they said, Hulk, we're sorry to bother you, but there's this little boy here. He's been really ill. He just beat cancer. And Hulk said, yeah, hold on just a second. And just like in Rocky 3, where he turns it on and off, he walks out and he's like, how you doing, brother? He turned it on for the kid, gave him the total Hulk Hogan experience, signed his autograph. Then he walks back in, sits down to finish the interview, and he's like, all right, yeah, let's keep going here. And the guy's like, how do you turn it on and off like that? And he was just like, just like Thunder Lips. That's the name of the game,
I had that happen to me with Gene Deckeroff, the super awesome play-by-play voice, Florida State, Tampa Bay. Where do I have that? Oh, look. You got props, huh, Jabroni? Here is my Gene Deckeroff signed football. Okay. Gene did that to me once where we were on the radio, and I called him, and I was like, hey, Gene, this is during the commercial break. I'm like, Gene, are you ready to go on? He's like, all right, Mark, I got to get these groceries inside or my wife's going to kill me. He's literally like Rodney Dangerfield. I swear. That's literally what he said to me. Mark, I got to get these groceries in or my wife will kill me. Then he's like, how much time we got? I go, 2 minutes, we'll go on. Same thing. Minute we went on, he turned into Gene Deckeroff. Crazy. You've never seen anything like this. It was so awesome. And Gene, and I say this, the first guy I met in Florida that called me up personally and said, Mark, you need to do this, this, and this. You got to call that guy. You got to email him. Do this, do that, and you'll be successful. Was Gene the bleeping show Deckeroff, and I'll never forget that. Never, to the day I die. I met you later. You're still up there, Mount Rushmore, but Gene Deckeroff's the man.
No, I love Gene Deckerhoff, even as a Gator. I interviewed him a few times, met him once at Suntree Country Club in person. And if you remember when he retired, Mick Hubert retired, we turned it into a buddy cop show, Deckerhoff and Hubert.
Oh, yeah, I'd watch that show. I literally, because I could see them arguing about like ordering a sandwich at a store. Like I would watch this for hours. I would. Yeah, Hogan, this is what I think about is you're not in a normal job. This is professional wrestling. It's kind of a circus act, I feel. And I love wrestling, and I say that comment. You have to do whatever you can to stay at the top. Because the minute you blow out your knee or the crowd doesn't like you anymore, they'll get rid of you. You're done. There's no second act. You're finished. So you have to make sure you stay up there at all possible. Anything you could do to stay up there. So I get it for Hulk Hogan. Look, he was big for late 70s to what do you say, early 2000s? That's a hell of a run for professional wrestling. And he was. And I don't care what anyone says. I love Suburban Commando with him and Christopher Lloyd. I love that movie. I'd watch it over and over again. I would. I love that. What was the other one? He was like a nanny. There was another kid's movie he was in. He was like a nanny in that one. No Holds Barred. I liked him in Gremlins 2. I like that cameo. What was the boat show? Thunder. Remember he was like on
Thunder in Paradise. Yes.
Yeah. Was that filmed here? I get confused by this.
I think it was filmed in Tampa, right?
Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah. And that had some great cameos. I remember one time it looked like a beached whale, but no, it was Van Vader on the beach. Remember Big Van Vader? And we haven't even mentioned, Mark, that he used to be a bouncer at the Anchor Club right here in Cocoa Beach. That's, as a very young man, and that's kind of how he was discovered. Him and Mr. T both. This is interesting. They were both discovered because of being bouncers. And, Sylvester Stallone tells the story of how he found Mr. T for Rocky 3. There was some sort of bouncer competition going on, and he saw this muscled guy with a mohawk and everything, and he's like, we need that guy for Rocky 3. And I know I'm sidetracking about Mr. T, but God, please keep him alive for a while longer, at least not this week. And, so he says that Mr. T, they brought him in, and the acting coaches were like, all right, well, we're going to start kind of and Sylvester Stallone said to him, no, don't teach this guy how to act. We just got to let him be him. And so that scene where he's challenging Rocky at the steps of the statue, and he, and the I pity the fool, that was ad-libbed. That was not in the script. That was Mr. T just being Mr. T. And, just a great job on Sylvester Stallone recognizing that. But, Hogan and Mr. T had a great friendship. And because Mr. T helped Hogan get into, or they met in Rocky, then Hogan brings T aboard for the first WrestleMania. A lot of people also don't know Hogan's partner wasn't going to be Mr. T for that. It was going to be Sergeant Slaughter. But, and this is a great story too for wrestling dorks out there. Sergeant Slaughter was the other huge name, right? And he gets approached by Hasbro, and they say, look, we want you to join G.I. Joe. And so he goes to Vince McMahon and he says, Mr. McMahon, I'd like to do this G.I. Joe thing while also wrestling. Well, normally McMahon back then green-lighted guys to do these side projects, but he said, well, I'm sorry, Sergeant. We just signed a toy deal with LJN, so you can't go work for Hasbro. And Slaughter said, LJN? What's LJN? This is Hasbro. This is G.I. Joe. And so Vince McMahon told him, look, you got two options. I'll give you till Monday. You can either go be G.I. Joe or you can wrestle with us. Slaughter went back and told McMahon, sorry, I'm going to be G.I. Joe. And it was his wife that convinced him. She said, look, you can always go back and be a professional wrestler, but you may never get a chance to be America's hero and cartoon character. So he departs to go do G.I. Joe, and they needed a partner for Hulk Hogan. And the first person Hogan comes to mind, he's like, well, let's bring in Mr. T, brother. And so that's kind of how WrestleMania 1 came together.
That is a hell of an answer. And I didn't even have to ask ChatGPT or Wikipedia. That was incredible that that. I think you've lived the greatest childhood of any human being I know. I'm not kidding around.
I'm still living it, man. I don't care. I'm 48 years old, and I still am a big kid. We get to work in sports, Mark. I'm not out in the 300-degree heat tarring roofs,
So in theory, he does Rocky 3, which opens the door for him to know Mr. T. Then Mr. T comes on. That takes WrestleMania to the next level, but also the partnership with MTV and Cyndi Lauper. It's a perfect storm. It just, all of this came together. All right. I hope next, and I really mean this, I hope next Thursday we're not talking about the death of anyone. I don't want this to keep happening. It's awful. It really is. Let's end with this. Okay. Football is back. We have a Hall of Fame game tonight, which I think is pointless, but it's still football on the television screen. I think the TV executives are high-fiving. Finally, there's a reason to turn on broadcast television again for the first time since the NBA Finals. I love it. So you got Jaguar stuff. You got high school. What's going on, Tim?
Yeah, we'll start with high schools here locally in Brevard County. We Chastity Banks, our high school reporter, and our three great photographers, Craig Bailey, Malcolm Denmark, Tim Short, they've been going out to all of the different camps of all of the high schools here in Brevard County. We've already had reports from the North End. We had Titusville and Astronaut. That was published on Tuesday. We had the South End. We had Palm Bay and Heritage. That was published on Wednesday. Earlier today on Thursday, we published one with back-to-back state champion Cocoa, as well as Melbourne Central Catholic. And we're going to keep rolling them out. We got 16 varsity programs here, Mark. We also have 2 8-on-8 programs. So, lots of football here in Brevard County, but we're going to be covering the heck out of it leading up to the preseason games. The Jamborees are the 15th August 15th. And then the regular season gets going August 18th, Mark. It's crazy to think kids go back to class August 11th. It seems so early. And then sports start getting going on the 18th. So if you're a fan of volleyball, they're getting going. You've got cross country is going to be going, swimming and diving. They're all going to be going. So lots of stuff. So you got to go to floridatoday.com. You got to read about all of those angles. Coco's trying to reload, Mark. They're Mr. Football from 2024, quarterback Brady Hart's at Texas A&M. They're Dairy Farmers Mr. Football 2023, receiver Javon Boggs. He's now at Florida State. So, I hear they've got a good quarterback who's come in now. They've got a Florida commit on defense who's really good. So, a lot of good things going on in Brevard County. As far as the NFL goes, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say this. Sorry if I'm cutting you off here, Tim. It was interesting. I got to sit down with Chris Sands, head coach of O'Galley, earlier this week. And I'm trying to talk to as many coaches as I can. Also talk to, the head coach there at Melbourne. So what's interesting was Chris Sands brought up with me, and I know you break this down in your reports of the Florida Today. O'Galley had to redo their whole schedule because teams didn't want to play them. So it's interesting. Now they're taking on teams in South Florida. They're going to take on Cocoa here locally. They had to up their schedule. So it's interesting. You have Cocoa, O'Galley. I know Heritage is doing this as well. There's this like separation where we have all these teams in the county, but it's like they're in different conferences or something, and they're not going to play each other. I just want to get your thoughts on this. I just thought that was fascinating when Coach said that to me.
Yeah, so there's aside from the FHSAA, there's now the SSAA, which is kind of a smaller conference. A couple of years ago, Bayside and Space Coast joined it, and Space Coast won the state title in it last year. And now we've got a couple of other teams in Brevard. I believe Holy Trinity and Satellite have both gone to it. And what the SSAA is for schools and teams that can't compete with the Cocos, can't compete with the O'Galleys. Those schools are, now that it's open season on recruiting and NIL and all these things, they can get the best players in the counties just to come to their schools. And, Chris Sands and Ryan Schneider of Cocoa, it's no coincidence that they're the longest tenured coaches in the county. They've both been in their job since 2018. Coaches don't stay around like they used to because it's so much different now. So, those guys have been around the longest. They've got the two best programs. But, the SSAA is for those other schools who can kind of compete against like competition instead of getting their heads bashed in. I remember a few years ago, Cocoa beat Space Coast something like 70-0. It's just not right. So it's good that Space Coast can now, play teams where it's competitive. And so there's that part of it. And, go ahead.
I'm just, it's going to be interesting, and we will preview it. I keep cutting you off at the end here. I apologize. This is like we're Macho Man and Hulk Hogan. I'm so sorry I did that. We're here at Tim Walters, Florida Today newspaper. Yeah, check out the newspaper for the latest on all their previews for all the teams that are going to be playing coming up here. And like you said, 15th's the kickoff classic, like 2 weeks from now. All right, what's your Jaguar camp? What do you got going on, buddy?
Yeah, just real quick. So the Jaguars, they've got their first, they're going to be doing a scrimmage on Friday. August 1st will be their first scrimmage that they're opening to fans. So people will get to see Travis Hunter. That's what everyone's excited about. We've been detailing all camp, what he's been doing. So there have been 6 camp practices. Today is the 7th. So if you want to see what Travis Hunter's doing, if you want to read about the rest of the team, obviously, because we're doing camp reports, we're doing features on players, you name it, Jacksonville.com, the Florida Times Union is where you can find all of that. And their first game is the 9th, Saturday, a week from Saturday. They are hosting the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's the first of their 3 preseason games. It's their only home one. Their third preseason game, August 23rd, is at Miami, so you'll get to see a couple of state teams play. They'll also be practicing with each other most of the week. I believe the Jaguars get down there midweek, and then they're going to be scrimmaging Thursday and Friday leading up to the game Saturday. So, you can also read about the Dolphins. We own the Palm Beach Post. Joe Shad, formerly of ESPN, is one of our reporters down there. Hal Habib has been covering the Dolphins since I believe like 1982-ish or so. So Hal's been down there forever. You know, he used to be a guest on my podcast quite regularly to talk about the Dolphins. He still has a Danny bar from 1984, a Dan Marino bar from his rookie year. Or 83, I believe, was Marino's rookie year. But
chocolate
yeah,
bar?
I always dared him to open it up and take a bite, but he's not going to do that. Lord knows what happens if you were to open that up and see that chocolate bar, Mark.
Dude, I had a Gator fan give me I think you've seen it in my office. It's somewhere over. I know it's been show and tell all day. It's like a 1984 Pepsi bottle where it has Gators SEC champs. I'm telling you, from like 1984. I wouldn't drink that, and I'm not eating that chocolate bar. I'm sorry. I'm not doing it. There's no way.
Yeah, the oldest beverage I have, Mark, I have a 6-pack of Shaq soda from when he was drafted by the Magic. So I also have that from 1993, I believe is how old that is. It was actually fairly near where this shirt was in my memorabilia storage.
Why don't your office, can you just open it up as an 80s museum for memorabilia? You have so many things. There's so many. Well, you haven't even brought up your Transformers behind you. You know what? All right, that's it. We're done. His name is Tim Walters, Florida Today newspaper. My man, thanks for your help. Have a great weekend. I'll see you next week. All right?
I appreciate it, Mark. And what you gonna do when the Timster runs wild on you?